We'll be talking about a lot of information tonight. Pardon me. I think we'll be going maybe 1 hour. We'll see. Frank's timing is very generous. And first and foremost, we have a crisis with Donald Trump attacking the Supreme Court yesterday. We know he's guilty as hell of a range of crimes besides ones he's already been convicted of. And we'll talk a little bit tonight about what this fog machine really looks like. In the near future, as I was just saying, on the other platform that we know is manipulated, X, previously known as Twitter, they are subduing voices that resist Donald Trump. They are subduing voices that challenge Elon Musk's idea of conservatism, no less. And it's not a mystery anymore. It's actually been demonstrated by people who do great data research. And it's dangerous, ultimately. So this is one of the reasons why I have moved a lot of the operation over to Substack, is so that we can use a different platform for now. We'll see how long that stays. Hopefully it becomes a place that is conducive. I don't know about you, but I'm already enjoying some of the people we're seeing over here having conversations. And one of them is the guest that we have tonight. Because, as you know, Frank was on MSNBC and a great voice about legal matters, investigation matters, counterintelligence matters. And there is a need for people to continue to ask the vital questions about what our enemies use to exploit the problems we have, not just in America, but in Europe, in Canada, and parts of the world that Russia plays its games. There's almost no place that Russia isn't running its operations. And so long as that remains the case, we have to have people who are seasoned enough to do the work that can shed light on how this all looks from their professional point of view. I think that one thing I appreciate about Frank Figliuzzi is that I've never known him, when he's making comments, to be someone who's got a political axe to grind. And it is really, I think it's a detriment to us when we have people who turn their political acts into, commentary without really revealing to us, what's driving their agenda. That's not something I really want to find. The way in which I interpret the world should not come through someone's political axe grinding. I do not have a political party on purpose. I'm an independent, have been my whole life. Voted for George Herbert Walker the First, not because I believed in his policies across the board. Actually, I was anti-apartheid. He was very friendly to the South African Pik Botha regime and the stabilization idea. So, we were at odds about that, plenty of other things. But it's just that I think the Democratic Party failed to pass a candidate over I could understand and relate to when I was at that age, and that was true of a lot. And as we went through, there's a lot of candidates that went that way. So, being independent, frankly, what I was telling him is, being an independent, I always appreciated non-political voices giving me commentary, people that were even keeled and neutral. And you've always had that about you. And now we have this thing so crazy that you have to give disclaimers to say, well, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but
right.
And it's because it's so crazy. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Yeah, it is a wild time. I typically despise politics, and I stay focused on my role as a national security law enforcement intelligence analyst. But as I've been telling folks, this is so much bigger. What we're going through right now is so much bigger than politics. It's everything about politics, and it's so much more. It's an existential threat to what we believe in. And people, I don't know, if you want to get deep and say, well, that sounds like politics. I mean, in a sense, well, okay, in my version of politics, it's not. This is,
right.
Yeah, this isn't about whether you endorse this guy or that guy for Congress. This is about, this is about whether we have democracy in 4 years or not. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
And whether we're able to have the kind of conversations that the dialectic that is healthy for America to come to decisions.
Well, I mean, again, here we go with what you just prefaced. Don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but are we going to have free and fair elections? I can tell you this with certainty. The Trump administration will try their darndest to make sure that we don't have
Right.
free and fair elections. That's for sure.
Right.
That's for sure.
So I have that on the list, so we're going to come to that. But I want to start off with some breaking news this last week that I know you covered. You had Roger on, and you had Julie Brown on the other night. That there is some really, really disturbing material in these Epstein logs, and what I'd like to focus on for our conversation is how wide this compromise looks, and how powerful the people that have to be covered are. Because we've already heard from Pam Bondi reflexively saying this could have catastrophic disaster on so many important people. So, how bad is that, considering your experience in counter intelligence, especially, or even investigations? I know you covered even domestically that
Right.
didn't even involve that, where
Yeah.
people covering for other people creates a massive problem.
Yeah, I mean, as I work through this in my head, informed by 25 years as an FBI agent at varying levels of responsibility, all the way up to assistant director, running field offices, running squads, running very high profile, sensitive cases. This one stymies me in the sense that so many things had to get blocked at so many levels for this to have gone as horribly wrong as it appears to have gone. And so, I mean, you can start with Miami and the
Hmm.
West Palm Beach RA, which is the FBI satellite offices that initially handled the complaint from the local police and sheriff. Um, there were so many turns and twists, Chris, where someone at a high level eventually had to say, we're not, we're doing it this way, not that way. And whether, you can go all the way up to the New Mexico ranch. Why
Hmm.
wasn't that fully explored? Why don't we have access to unredacted information, including all of the camera footage from inside Epstein's various residences? What's up with that? What about the island? What about the FBI San Juan office that is responsible for covering the U.S. Virgin Islands? What about all of that
Hmm.
involves power and wealth, the likes of which many of us can't even fathom, that allows folks to not only be corrupted clearly, but to
Hmm.
corrupt others. Others.
Which is my concern about that first question, which is that if you're trying to cover the big fish, how many little fish have to start covering each other in order to keep this going? And more importantly is, like we've seen the firing of the assistant DA or the Attorney General, James Huntley, for Eastern District, and that when the judges say, well, we're going to have this guy, in comes Todd Blanche and said, nope, fired, not loyal.
So yeah, this whole thing. Now we're getting into this imperial presidency where we're losing the concept of the three branches of government. And there's some bright spots. Obviously, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but
Yeah, yeah.
we had a good Supreme Court ruling
Hmm.
on tariffs. But with regard to who actually, this idea of firing a U.S. attorney who's been named by judges.
Hmm.
Because think about this, because you aren't naming folks who
Right,
are qualified, right? So,
right.
yeah, yes, a president gets to appoint U.S. attorneys, comma, assuming they're normal human beings who are qualified lawyers who get the job done for the people in their district. And when that doesn't happen, yes, the rules say that the federal judges in that district get to pick somebody. And so now at least twice, maybe three times, I'm losing track. The president has said, "No, I pick the U.S.
Hmm.
attorneys, not you, and I fire this guy that you just picked." And so It's there's a macro. If we step back, there's a whole macro picture here, which is we have a president who wants to be all things and have all powers. Quote, I can do anything I want. And one of the most disturbing things I've seen, and people go, well, there's a lot of disturbing things, Frank. There's a lot of child rape, Frank. But as somebody who came in every day to work, through 5 different times in my career in the FBI, my duty station was FBI headquarters 5 different times. And that gets into, the whole career path, and leadership in the FBI is generally a rotation back and forth, field headquarters for every promotion. But I took great pride in walking down Pennsylvania Avenue and turning into the FBI headquarters building. And right across the street, of course, this mammoth Department of Justice building that stood for justice. And what did we see this week, Chris? We saw a giant poster of Trump hanging from the Department of Justice. If people don't understand, and clearly maybe half of our population doesn't understand that what's wrong with that, then we're very deep into a mess. That hurt. That
Uh,
hurt to see
I,
that poster.
out of like absolutely, and I want to ask you about how that works in your capacity. I want to point out Lincoln Square popped in here and said you will be coming up with need to know in the near future, and I want everyone to remember that. We'll talk about that at the end.
Well,
Um,
I need to know when that will happen. Tell me.
so we'll be glad to have that boosted and boosted. Um, I want to come to how you feel about it as someone who worked in there, but I want the viewers to be able to know how does that land in their life when it comes to these violations of these attorneys being picked in the way the DOJ has been completely turned upside down. What does it mean for the average person across America from your point of view?
Yeah, I think one way to look at this, if you can get folks to listen to it, is just flipping the tables very, very nicely and civilly. Look, how do you feel about the next Democrat president doing this? Or let's go back in time. How do you feel about Obama or Biden? Absolutely taking control of the entire government, threatening by name, calling out by name the Supreme Court justices that they picked because they dared
Hmm.
to vote on the law, by the law, go by the law. Uh, how are you with the shooting and killing of American citizens on the streets of America by camouflaged masked men who don't have badge numbers or even agency identifiers most of the time? Just keep running through the litany of this. And how about encampments being set up to house tens of thousands of human beings in cities and states near you? Even, by the way,
Hmm.
recently, Texas rejecting, Texas towns rejecting these internment camps near them. You good with all that if that's Obama, Biden, or the next Democrat president? And you're going to get some pause there for sure. Did you vote for all of this? And increasingly, the answer is no. The answer is no. I didn't vote for all that. The polls are showing some disgust there. So how does it
Yeah.
impact your life? Look, a real kind of close to home. You got a corrupt mayor, right? You can't stand your mayor. You know he's corrupt. Everybody in town knows he's corrupt, but he's a Republican, and the FBI is not opening a case on him
Hmm.
because of party. You good with that? Are you good with that?
Or Eric Swalwell calling out Pam Bondi, saying, "I've been threatened. I've been threatening me is one thing. I signed up for it, but my family and the fact that, and he named multiple locations across the country where those threats have been called in, and the prosecution has been completely turned down. You make a great point. When roles are reversed, what does that look like? So this is actually pretty alarming, especially with the amount of threats that go into Congress and judges.
Yeah, violence has become acceptable for so many people if it involves the other, whether it's a brown person in the street or whether it's some protester they disagree with, whether it's a congressman being threatened and his family being threatened with death. Um,
Mhm.
people seem to have shrugged their shoulders and said, "Yeah, I mean, that's life today in politics. He chose that life." No one, no one chose that. No one chose to have their families threatened. No, and that's where we seem to be. And it's interesting that when Pam Bondi was asked that question at her recent testimony by Swalwell about, "Hey, you following up on threats?" That the one thing in all of her hours of testimony, the one thing she seemed to realize was that she couldn't go there was threats against
Mhm.
Congress. And she jumped to attention at that point and said, "Oh no, we
I
are."
did notice her body language was
Yeah,
radically different than that other
yeah,
side that could be Saturday Night Live parody at this point.
yeah. And I do find that interesting. I think part of it is because everyone is getting those death threats. And I
Mhm.
and I think that's a personal thing for her as well. I mean, she wouldn't turn and look at child rape victims, but
Mhm.
she would say, "Oh no, 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 we're investigating death threats against you." So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's kind of a bizarre situation, really.
And for our viewers who don't know me, I'm in here. I live in Ukraine now for 4 years, but before I lived here, my daily life for 12 years was observing, and then in the later part of it, reporting things that I saw online that crossed a certain legal threshold. So there's a lot of crazy stuff on the internet we find obnoxious or offensive, but then there's a particular line where it bears necessity to call field offices even. And I had to do it for people I absolutely despise, like Ted Cruz. But if I saw a threat that says, I will do the following, and it was more than emoting, I would take the call. And I would even publicly tell people, like, hey, you may think
Yep,
it's cute and funny, but
yep,
when you cross that line, it doesn't matter what category you're
yep.
in, you're going to get reported.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, Chris. I do the same thing in my social media. I if I see somebody who maybe in some sad way is trying to agree with something I said, but goes ahead and actually threatens to harm someone on the far
Hmm.
right, yeah, that's an immediate report for me.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think I got to tell you, I think what's disturbing is lately when I've been I don't know what's going on at some of these social media platforms, but when I reported, "Hey, this guy just threatened to kill," people. The
Hmm.
response is, "We've reviewed it. Boilerplate. We've reviewed this, and it does not violate our standards." I'm
That's
like,
right.
"Well, okay, I told you. I told you."
Yeah, and there's also the when you have the breakdown of investigations like the shooting of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, and you get told ahead of time that there is no civil rights investigation going on before we're like the protocol is all out of whack. Explain to our viewers who might not know this what what was the norm and how far are we along that road where we've got a lot of work to go back?
Oh boy. So look, federal agent involved shooting, whether fatal or not. Okay, just to give you an example, if agents have to shoot a dog
Mhm.
on a SWAT raid, which they try not to because they bring pepper spray and all of that. But if they ultimately have to shoot a dog, guess what? That's a use of lethal force investigation. Doesn't matter. And and what we're seeing here is ICE first saying, "We've got this." DHS saying, we don't really need the FBI on this." Then at first it was FBI, "No, we've got this." Then it was, "No, we're really not doing a god darn thing on this."
Mhm.
And then, by the way, the state can't do it either because we're not giving them access to the evidence. Okay,
Mhm.
so we have a ready-made scenario for cover up. That's what's going on here. And look, what did we just hear this week from the New York Times? I've posted it on Substack and other platforms, which is that back in March, way before Renee Good was killed,
Mhm.
back in March, ICE shot and killed a 23-year-old young man,
Said
American,
South Padre, yeah.
South Padre Island, Texas. The scenario, well, you say, well, maybe he was doing something bad. Well, guess what? ICE was helping the police. God, and I don't know why. If, by the way, to the local police officers listening to me, if ICE comes along and says, "Do you need help directing traffic around this car accident?" The answer should be, "No, thanks. We've got it. Thank
Mhm.
you. Nothing to see here." But what happened in South Padre was, my understanding is there was some kind of a traffic incident, maybe an accident. ICE shows up and says, "Hey, we'll help." Yeah, right. And here comes this 23-year-old young man, no criminal record, U.S. citizen, And here's where the story sounds eerily similar to the Renee Good nonsense, which is we tried to stop him and from the traffic situation, and he accelerated and he ran over an ICE agent. and
Right.
and so one clue would be, oh my God, he ran over an ICE agent. Where this poor agent, is he in ICU? No, he was treated and released. Okay, well, so was the agent who shot Renee Good. And by the way, he wasn't run over. So that's what they're saying here. And guess what? Why are we talking about this now? Because the initial police report, which I believe, according to Joaquin Castro,
Mm-hmm.
was DPS, Texas Department of Public Safety. So that's your state troops, right? That report said a law enforcement involved shooting. Okay, you mean you didn't find it necessary to name the agency? Now the New York Times is reporting this week that was an ICE shooting, a fatal ICE shooting, and we need answers.
And what are you seeing as some bright lining in there? Because I occasionally am not. I shouldn't say I'm surprised. I shouldn't be surprised, but there are some surprises where this interagency normal that has been destroyed, like the Guthrie case, for instance, when investigation was sent elsewhere and bypassed the feds. What do you see that's happening as a result of this destruction of the DOJ that maybe gives us at least a little bit of hope, where good people are still doing the right thing?
Oh my goodness. Well, in some ways, that's a rhetorical question you just asked, and the answer is in the question. I look on the bad side of this, and again, I come back to the huge poster hanging. By the way, all these posters are all over Washington. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
This one says "Make America Safe Again" because it's the Justice Department. But
Mhm.
and I don't know. I read somewhere they're like, are they $17,000 each or some ridiculous amount of money we're spending on these posters?
Mhm.
But when you see something like that slapped on one of the most critical institutions of our government, you have to realize the erosion of credibility that's going on in the American people's eyes, right? So
Mhm.
Trump owns that building. It's like the branding that he made so much money off of: Trump wine, Trump towers, Trump ties, Trump state, Trump University, Trump Department of Justice we have now. And
Mhm.
when you see things like, boy, I've been pondering the Nancy Guthrie abduction case, if that's what it is, and the weird talk coming out of this Pima County sheriff. You have to wonder, and I'm just wondering out loud. I don't know, but it's his reluctance, to use the FBI laboratory for all this evidence, arguably the best in the world, is part of that. I don't know if I trust the FBI. I don't know if I want the FBI having a lead.
What was it like 20 years ago if someone did that at that level? What would that be like?
Well, first, there'd be no dispute that the lab, the go-to lab in the nation, arguably in the world, was the FBI laboratory.
Right.
And they invented some of these DNA techniques, mitochondrial DNA, all of this, rapid DNA, which is in about an hour, they can match a profile to an unknown profile to a known profile. I mean, we're at the point. I don't know if the budget is still there, where some police cruisers are going to be outfitted with DNA that
Mhm.
you stick your swab there. You can do it at the police station also. Let's say you refuse to identify yourself. They give you a buccal swab. They stick it in a machine. It goes to the FBI, and in an hour, they're telling the police who you are. Um, that's the kind of expertise we're talking about. And now we've got weirdness where the sheriff is saying there is no lead agency. Now I've talked about whether that means it's really a kidnapping or not, right? The FBI should be in charge of a legit kidnap abduction.
Mhm.
They seem not to be. I don't know what's going on, but my fear is that the FBI is not only losing its stature amongst law enforcement, but that all of this, the ICE, the DHS, all of this is blowing back on your local police departments to the point where they're
Right.
embarrassed. And the head of the largest law enforcement organization in Texas, of all places, has come out and said, this is embarrassing. This is going to hurt all of us with a badge. That's where we are today.
So we're going to go to what happens with the institutional breakdown and the trust, because I want to talk what our adversaries do with that, international adversaries. But before we get there, we're really close to a very important part of what's going on with these ICE agents, et cetera, where they're using very modern technology that most of us do not have. We remember like Google Glasses and those items that were really cool. They can show you where you can go buy things and information about space you're in. But now we know that they've used them to have instant facial recognition and to gather, on the ground data, and then mixing it with Palantir level, you know, data sets behind it. They're way ahead of the citizens on the street in a way that's unchecked.
Right. So generally, another example of how everything's been turned upside down. Generally, I would be a fan of high-tech law enforcement because not only is it far more efficient, right? So
Hmm.
I've been saying, look, there's a far more efficient way to find the worst of the worst who are here unlawfully
Hmm.
and not have to smash windows in traffic on the street because you
Hmm.
suspect the brown person in the car might be unlawfully here. Okay,
Hmm.
you can do this with technology, but now we've got the worst of technology of applications. What do I mean by that? They target their neighborhoods with technology mapping as to
Hmm.
where they're more likely than not to find brown people. They now want, just this week we saw a report saying they want one-stop shopping for their technology. They want to be able to point a camera at you and find out who you are, where you come from, your criminal record, all of that in one stop. And
Right.
again, years ago, I might go, you know what? In the right hands, that's a very efficient way to do this. Now I'm saying, no, they're spying on us. And I wrote a column for Lincoln Square that came out, I believe it was Monday, Tuesday. No, it came out this week. And
Hmm.
what was the column on? It was that they are hitting up our social media platforms with administrative subpoenas. By the way, it's an abuse of an administrative subpoena.
Right.
Don't be fooled by the word subpoena and think that a judge or a prosecutor is involved in it. They're not. It's an
Right.
it's an agent or a supervisor at ICE who is signing a form that says, give me, pretty please, Google or Instagram, Meta, please give me who is behind this account that is critical of ICE.
Hmm.
That is spying. And so all of this, the Palantir usage, the facial recognition, that has been turned on us, not for law enforcement purposes, but rather to spy. And these agents took an oath to protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution, and they seem hell bent on violating the Constitution.
I'm running all over the Fourth Amendment. So we actually had a journalist on this week. She's 20 years old, out of Boston, and she has been subpoenaed for contact of information of people at the ICE rallies. I believe it was at the ICE rally, but something to that effect. And someone like the young journalist Georgia who was arrested with
Yeah.
Don Lemon,
Mhm.
they don't have the capital behind them to go fight back. They have to hopefully just have someone wise enough to go, okay, you actually don't have to respond, reflexively to that fear. But we do know that they're doing that to journalists as well, intimidating them to squeeze out of them information. If they talked to someone who was at an event who might know something, they're being squeezed for those sources in the same way.
This is an all-out attack on a free press in our society, which is, as you know, is critical to our democracy. And the
Right.
Washington Post reporter, that case, well, not involving a protester, but rather involving an alleged leak of classified information by somebody.
Hmm.
Uh, that search of her home by
Hmm.
the FBI included, and you may be aware of this, the judge allowed the agents, if needed, to forcibly use her fingerprint or
Right.
her retina, if
Right.
needed, unlock her phone or other devices. Now, we're finding out this week that the judge is livid about the fact that the prosecution conveniently forgot to tell the judge that there were certain laws that should be applied to raiding, searching a journalist's home. And he is now realizing that they left that part out of their briefing,
Hmm.
and he would have liked to have known that there
That's
were
right.
separate laws that applied. And the burden, interestingly, the burden is on the prosecution to point out the reasons why the judge should not sign something.
Right.
And this judge is pissed.
Right.
Yeah.
And they have been calling them forward, not just these bad like real estate lawyers that get sent up to argue very sophisticated cases, but all throughout these hearings for this last year, repeatedly they're getting scorned for misleading the courts, if not outright lying to the court about what they know and what they're trying to apply.
The courts, again, I try desperately to find bright spots, and we do have them. I mean, since Trump took over, we now have over 4,000. Think about this. We have over 4,000 court rulings at various levels that have said um, Trump's got this wrong. Trump's got this wrong. Most of them have to do with ICE activity. 4,000 rulings. Now I know I can already hear the cynics among us saying, "Yeah, okay," and he's going to ignore those rulings, but he does
Yeah.
sometimes, and he doesn't. And we're going to try to find that line, aren't we? We're coming right up on that line where he blows off court findings.
We'll come to his latest attack on the big court, but I want to stick to what happens with these institutions and draw on your experience as a counterintelligence guy. How many different ways should we calculate what the adversaries want us to do to lose faith in our institutions and the consequences of losing faith in our institutions, from law enforcement level to judges to press, even? How many adversaries are out there doing that, and how serious do they commit themselves to doing this?
So you've likely heard me say, even back toward the first Trump administration, that foreign intelligence services would have paid $1 billion to have the kind of discord and polarization that we've brought on largely ourselves
Hmm.
in our country. This would have been the most successful foreign intelligence operation in history to turn the United States against itself. Yes, foreign adversaries do this. Yes, they're involved. But when you look at, for example, what Robert Mueller uncovered in his report as special counsel, indicting 24 Russians, including 16 GRU, military intelligence officers.
Right.
Um, and yes, we've learned that Putin ordered his services to assist or meddle with the Trump campaign. But really, the cost of that was peanuts for Putin. And what he got back was astounding, and we did it mostly to ourselves. So Trump is working off of, if you were to develop, back in my old job, if I were to develop a script,
Hmm.
for, say the Russians or the Chinese wanted, I would have, in fact, I would have been probably laughed out of the building if the script included completely destroy the reputation of institutions, of every institution in the United States, including the Centers for Disease Control. Ensure that Americans no longer trust
The
vaccines.
Kennedy Center.
Yeah, rename the Kennedy Center. Convince people to allow their kids to die without a measles vaccine. People would
Right.
have left me out of the building, but I would have said, well, this would be the ultimate of what the Russians would want to do to us. Trump is doing that. And whether he's working off a script or not doesn't, quite frankly, doesn't even matter anymore because it's the end effect of what our adversaries want. That's
Right.
happening right now.
Well, I lived in Ukraine for 4 years, and I can tell you that no matter how many missiles and drones they've lobbed our way, this country is not giving up. It's not resigning to a fate of servitude and becoming Russian subjects. So, what did they have to do? What did the Russians have to do? They had to send Witkoff back with promises of investments, and Kushner with promises of investments, and make a magic phone call to Trump and basically play the game they used to always play, which was, hybrid warfare, disinformation, and active measures programs.
all of this for Trump and his minions is transactional. It's money, it's power. Um, Trump could. There are so many places in his presidencies, plural, that we could point to where he would be a hero.
Hmm.
That people would go, God darn it, he did it right. You know, whether it's the Epstein files, and holding pedophiles accountable,
Hmm.
uh, whether it's Ukraine and saying, we are going to stand for something in the world. On and on, there were so many opportunities for him to do the right thing, and he chose deliberately to not do it. And I think a lot of his followers think, well, this is actually a body of philosophy for Trump. He strategically doesn't believe that the U.S. should be the superpower anymore. There should be regional super. And I look at them and I go, we are way beyond. We are way beyond a nice academic discussion of
Hmm.
power balance in the world. That is no longer what I believe this is about. Please explain then why it's strategic to not redact all of the Epstein files. Please tell me that when the law
Right.
says so. So it's not. It's about self-preservation, and the odds increase every day we see this stuff. The odds increase that he's compromised somehow, or he
Hmm.
thinks he's going to get something from somebody. And that's why we're seeing all this, whether it's telling Pam Bondi, Pam Bondi announcing we're disbanding by the way, within weeks of her taking office as Attorney General, she disbanded the National Cyber Criminal Tracking Unit. What in the world? Well,
Right.
of course, 1/5 of Trump Organization holdings
Hmm.
is crypto. It's crypto.
Right.
So everything is about
So
self-interest.
so who's going to
Everything.
get the pardon? The crypto guy.
Yeah, he pardons arguably one of the worst crypto criminals in the world, because that guy is in bed with his son Don Jr. and other friends, including Steve Witkoff's son, by the way. Um, yeah, yeah.
Well,
All
branching out from Trump. Now, I've always said Trump doesn't have an ideology. So in the mice model, we know he loves money. His ego that's the easiest part with him. He has resentments. But he doesn't really have a core ideology. But people around him absolutely have one. And it was on display with JD Vance's trips to Europe. And this week, especially here in Kyiv, it stood out where Marco Rubio couldn't wait to go talk to Slovakia and Hungary. And the interest of those discussions is largely baked in this kind of, they're the only ones really conservative. They're the only ones really anti-woke. But let's look at it not from that view. I want to look at it from the counterintelligence point of view, or the Kremlin machinations point of view. How they're playing that game in Europe. What do you think?
Boy, Rubio aligning himself with Orban is something else. I there's some there's it's just interesting. The the holding up of Orban in Hungary as the ideal is really delusional
Hmm.
and, and ugly.
Hmm.
And the preaching that we do to Europe and that Rubio does when he's in front of a European stage, on a stage, lecturing them, as we do in our latest national security strategy, which I urge everybody to read. It's actually not that long.
Right. It's shorter
That's
than ever. It's
Yeah,
the least.
yeah. The national security of the United States includes lecturing Europe that they're losing their countries, that
Right.
they've got too many foreigners in their countries, and they're going to lose it. And we're lecturing them. And by the way, don't count on us anymore. We're about regionality, and you guys, fend for yourselves. And there's some healthy aspects of that, right? It's tough to have everybody in the world relying on you. Should Europe spend more on their defense? Yes. Should
Yes.
should Europe be a major defender of Ukraine?
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's time for them to do it. But this idea that America first means America only, and means America authoritarian, which is where Rubio seems to be going with his alignment with Hungary. I think it has been an eye opener to our European friends, our Canadian friends, our British friends, and they're starting to get their act together.
Right.
Problem is,
They
what does
showed up at the panel this week when there was the negotiations going on. That was scheduled to be Russia, Ukraine, and then America in the middle. The Europeans showed up alongside. Go, well, we're here with you. What do you want to talk about?
yeah
And they made their presence quite known, and I think it had at least some measurable effect.
yeah, and this board of this so-called board of peace that Trump has created as kind of an alternate UN, um, is a travesty. Announcing $10 billion of our taxpayer dollars is going to this board for what? Stationery?
Hmm.
For letterhead?
Hmm.
Coffee and croissants at the meetings? What's the $10 billion for? And uh, he fell asleep for large portions of that meeting with his board of peace,
Right.
and then announced that we have carrier groups off of Iran right now, so that doesn't sound very peaceful. But
Right.
we are deep into the authoritarian slide. We're there, and if we're going to do things like Orban does in Hungary, you can kiss the media goodbye.
Hmm.
For one thing, that's going to go.
Can, can you give me some examples, even if it's a bit of a theory on this, examples where someone had been co-opted by a foreign intelligence service operation that maybe not have realized that whatever their objectives were, whether it's ideology or some business venture, had been started to be exploited, that they were caught by surprise, and you guys had to sit them down and say, look, you probably in your capacity are a really nice guy, but we need to go over some data with you. We have information that XYZ country is exploiting your objectives for a very hostile reason. And the reason why I ask that is because it's one thing to take to obvious people like Trump, who just doesn't give a shit, and some of the other psychopaths around him, but they're surrounded by people who are caught up in an ideology, or at least a worldview that is being exploited. Could you give us a walkthrough of what that looked like in your capacity?
History is filled. The history of espionage is filled with some folks who may have been well intentioned and acted out of ideological purposes, and then realized they were in way over their head.
Hmm.
Uh, and there's stories of seductions, honey traps, even FBI agents throughout history who have been compromised. I'm thinking specifically of Richard Miller out of FBI Los Angeles, who was seduced by a Chinese operative.
Mm.
She also allegedly seduced another FBI supervisor. And then it's too late once you realize you can, historically, you could look at Russia's attempt to get into the Black civil rights movement in the United States
Correct. Right.
and try to use that movement to further divide and
Hmm.
also to expand on ideology. Look at how you're being treated here.
Right.
Communism is beautiful. Everyone's equal in communism. And
Mao used those with the Mary Louise Strong and the Gelders against the Tibetans. They would come back in the 60s and say, "Oh, look, he freed the silly monks that were all being held slaves
yeah,
by the Dalai Lama," and they believed it
yeah,
until they got older and went, "Oh my God, I was an idiot."
yeah, the seduction stories are there. And then even for folks who knew going in that, yeah, I'm dealing with the Russians, but God darn it, I'm doing it. And then later came to vehemently disown what they did. And
Hmm.
the old case of the Falcon and the Snowman. It's a book.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And Christopher Boyce. These young guys had access to classified because of their job, and they decided to make some bucks. They'd walk it into the Russians,
Hmm.
and boy, you hear them testify even before Congress after they were caught and
Mhm.
realize that they have ruined their lives and forever
Mm.
evermore they will be known as traitors to the United States. That I used to in my early FBI days when I had to go brief classified audiences on defensive briefings, don't let this
Mhm.
happen to you. I used to play a video of their testimony before Congress, the guys who were known as Falcon and the Snowman. And there's one quote, and it would shake people up. There's one quote I think where one of them said, "If you if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything."
Mhm.
And man, that resonates with the audience. And I'm telling you, if this is where you're headed, I'm with you. Which is a lot of these
Right.
people surrounding Trump today. They may be true believers now,
Right.
but they will forever be known as traitors.
Well, there was a case back in the 70s, a congressional staffer who came and authentically reported, meaning authentically in the sense that he believed it to be true, that the Soviets had solved the housing problem. And people who knew better went, oh, wait a minute, hold on, yeah, hold on, we got to pull this guy in because that is so not what's happening. And they did find out essentially through the influence operation he had been, succumbed to, that he was there. And then later we have Intourist, which is how Donald Trump and the business class wound up going to Moscow and St. Petersburg in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah. It's they'll be hell to pay someday for these folks. Even Nuremberg like trials.
Ugh, I wish.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's get to one that's the biggest one, the big fish in that, and it goes back to the elections in a way. There was once upon a time a woman named Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know if you've heard of her. She went to Syria,
rather not.
and it was a year after she had been to the Dennis Kucinich had been brought to the exact same tour to give the private little tour through Assad's regime, and she comes back and in perfect pitch sings his song. Well, we know that story a bit, but we're now in modern times. She is, I think last time I heard, she has an intelligence position that's very important, and she's now in the election offices in Georgia after we talked last time.
Yeah, yeah.
What have you seen in that? Where should we get our compass ready for this problem with
Well,
intelligence agency head is now at your local
she,
election office?
she's a useful idiot. She is. I think she's the one in if you were back in grade school that wouldn't get picked for the kickball team. That maybe raised her hand and reminded the teacher that she forgot to assign homework for the
Hmm.
class. Nobody was taking her seriously. And when I say she's a useful idiot, I mean that I think Trump knows that and
Hmm.
is trying to get back in his good graces. I mean, think about this. When we were invading Venezuela recently, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Tulsi Gabbard was on a beach, possibly in
That's
Hawaii,
right. That's right.
but
That's right.
she was sending photos of herself on vacation. What does that mean? If she's a critical person in your intelligence military advisory group, she is the DNI.
Hmm.
You tell her you get your rear end back to Washington and get in the Situation Room. We're about to attack another country.
Right.
Nope, nope. She's waving hello from a beach. So that tells you everything you need to know about where she stands. So useful idiots are dangerous people because when they try to climb back into your good graces, they'll do just about anything, including showing up at an FBI search of Fulton County and grabbing all of the ballots there.
Hmm.
And bringing, just to insinuate maybe there's foreign power involvement. We're going to hear that. Where did we hear that this week? How about Trump yesterday when he was livid about the Supreme Court decision on tariffs? What did he imply at a press conference? The Supreme Court is in bed with foreign powers. And reporters repeated that back to him, say, hey, sir, you got any evidence that the Supreme Court is being influenced by foreign powers? You're you're about to see. He says, you're going to see. I'm going. Oh, okay, that's all you need
I
to
mean, the
do.
fact that he said he could also just destroy countries was rather alarming to me. He could just destroy countries. You got
Yeah.
mad on my day off, and I'm gonna just destroy you with by taxing the hell out of my own citizens. I'm gonna destroy you. That's psychopathy at its best. But back to Gabbard. There's what she's doing for Trump.
Yeah.
But I'm a bit concerned of what gates she's opening for foreign adversaries that like to,
Right.
I don't know, the 26165, 7455 GURI units. I know them pretty well. Um, they like to get in machines. They like to get into systems. And we know in 2026 they got really close with VR systems in Florida, and they were doing pen testing across the country.
Tulsi Gabbard is someone, based on some of what you already rattled off, her alignment and trips to Syria, which we still don't know. The payment, by the way, the funding of that trip is very suspicious and
Right,
odd.
right,
But her seeming alignment with Putin, she is someone, Chris, who I'm convinced would never pass a background investigation to serve coffee at the Starbucks at FBI headquarters.
right.
And now she's the director of national intelligence.
How
And
rampant
so
is that problem? Are you aware at least of, I mean, if you don't have a number, I understand, but how rapid are we watching that problem spread through the most vital systems of our national security apparatus?
we are hearing public reports that the vetting process is being discarded or shortened for everything from ICE agents to the deputy director of the FBI, who was Dan Bongino at one point. And there have been media reports, credible, that the polygraphs were waived for these people.
Right.
Um, if that's what's going on, then you better assume that we are letting people in that may be acting against U.S. interests. And I can tell you from my counter intel experience that on any given year, foreign powers are directing people to
Hmm.
apply to places like the State Department, the
Hmm.
FBI, the CIA. You can look it up. There are publicly announced cases.
Hmm.
Some of them are trained to try and defeat the polygraph. Some don't get it. At least one's been caught in the act of trying to defeat the polygraph.
Right, right.
And if that happens on a normal year, imagine if you announce, I'm waiving the vetting process. I'm shortening it. I'm doing away with the polygraph.
Hmm.
It's a disaster.
Well, I'm going to compound it now. So we're going to shift away from this one part of it to another, as we have the midterms coming. We have, the foreign disinformation teams using, like I know China has been recently busted with an amazing amount of AI um, usage to really fog the space. What are you seeing out there in some of those reports in the news, et cetera, that you know pique your curiosity and want to raise the alarms for us?
I'm very comfortable saying that as we approach the midterm elections coming up, and I just voted in my primary. I encourage
What?
everybody to do that. Early voting, of course. Uh, we're going to see an unprecedented use of AI and social media propaganda, disinformation, and misinformation.
Hmm.
And it's going to be not only foreign powers, but it's going to be domestic based groups as well.
Hmm.
And it's just a natural evolution. You don't have to be a tech expert
Right.
to see this coming. It's coming whether we want it or not. And then, but layer into that the people who've been laid off, in our government, the gatekeepers who are supposed to stop the propaganda, the influence. Um, don't take my word for it. Ask Pam Bondi. You'll find that she expanded the Foreign Influence Task Force that was
Hmm.
led by the FBI that was supposed to do just that, stop foreigners from influencing our elections and other decision making, has been disbanded. The folks at CISA, which is under, God help us, Kristi Noem under DHS,
That's right.
do you think that Kristi Noem is going to, when she gets if she ever gets a report on her desk that says, hey, we see this foreign power trying to do this over here, or this is happening here. You think she gives a damn? Unless, and this is the dangerous, equally dangerous or more. The report says, dear Secretary Noem, our intelligence analysts have discovered that this nation is trying to help Trump in the midterms, trying to help
Right.
Republican candidates.
Right.
And we, our parameters are that we stop this in its tracks. We got to defeat this foreign influence. And she goes, eh, let it happen. Let it happen. Yeah.
Well, and let's draw back to the fact that when you were in the agency, and after when you were at least in contact with people in agencies, isn't one of the good things of what we would call the deep state is that you had people that really didn't care which party it was. They knew that everyone loses if those things fail. If everyone loses if the foreign nationals are able to control our inner chaos.
Right. We've lost that unison.
By the way, that's something I learned by reading a book that Frank wrote.
Ah,
Um,
amazing. You just happen to have that in Ukraine. Do you
just
know,
happen just happen to have
you
there's
know
three
what?
books I brought here. You, Brian Karem,
Wow.
and one of the photographers I really like, New York Times
Well,
photographer.
thank you for the shameless plug. But do you know, since you're sitting there in Ukraine fighting the good fight, that book was translated into Ukrainian.
Yes, I
And
don't have a
and
copy of the Ukrainian version yet, but yeah.
it's I mean, you want to talk about as an author, particularly writing about how the FBI should work and used to work. Get your agent calls you and says, "Hey, we've got a foreign rights offer. The Ukrainians want to publish this in Ukrainian." I was blown away by that.
Right.
Blown away by that, and that's in part answering your question, which is have we any common fight in us anymore? Any concept of resilience in us anymore? That we should all fight for making our own decisions on who we vote for and how we vote.
Right.
But no, no. If like the example I gave, which sounds far fetched, where maybe Kristi Noem allows foreign influence to happen if it favors Trump in an election, and I think a ton of people would go, yay rah rah for Kristi Noem and the foreign power. And they would lie and go, well, I bet you everybody helped Trump, help Biden win or help Obama win, or the Supreme Court is influenced by foreigners, or, you know, it's a disaster. We've got to volunteer for our midterm elections. We have to vote in our midterm elections. Um, there's record in some places. There's record turnout already for early voting, Chris.
Right. Right.
Um,
And that's good because at least with early voting, and I found this out in Texas, eliminated my vote twice in 2013 and 2014. And ironically, John Cornyn, who just decided to turn Nick Fuentes on us, lost the vote because I voted in the primary there to keep a more crazy guy from being in office. And because I did it on election day, um, then I was given a provisional ballot, and I had always lived in the same district. Always, I'd been in the same house for a decade. But I'm a cyclist, and I intentionally don't update my ID at that time because I wanted to show what was wrong with the system. I'm a white guy. Let's see what happens when this happens. I did not get a memo that says go down and score your vote. Here's how you do it. I just got told about 2 months later your vote doesn't count. But wait a minute. I went to the ballot. I substantially proved I've always lived in the same place. Everyone out there knew me. They had every form of ID was me, and they said, "Well, okay, just fill this out." We won that case. Mark Vesey headed up a class action case. We actually won that case entirely for the exact reason I knew we would going in. But I had voted on election day, which means there's no time on the clock left. And at least with early voting, you have a chance to
chance.
really guarantee to get yourself in there.
Yeah. I'm telling you, folks, if you don't have a passport, get one. If you don't have your certified birth certificate, get one because it's coming. It's coming. We're going to demand you produce one or both of those documents.
Hmm.
Your driver's license isn't going to cut it. And it's a trap for many of
That's
us,
exactly what
right?
it was.
This is a trap because they want you to say, I don't think you really should have ID. No, I think you should have ID to vote. Yeah, of course.
Right.
But you understand where this is going.
Right.
A huge segment of our population has neither their passport nor their certified birth
That's
certificate.
exactly it. And there's a lot of elderly people or people in certain communities where they just don't have the paperwork to go get all the substantial paperwork that's necessary. And especially like you're aware that in Texas, they make it even harder. And that was by design. But I want to stick back to the thing, since I'm in Ukraine, you brought up your book being translated here. We're marking 12 years this week, and it was actually right now, 12 years ago, Yanukovych was getting on a plane and he was getting the fuck out of here. The reason was, for those who forget, was that it was substantially voted in favor of a trade agreement with Europe. And he, in November 21st, 2013, said, nope, we'll go with Russia. And the people said, no, 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 we already know we don't want that. Um, and that is a very important reality check for, I think, for Americans to remember, is that, if you're going to have your country, you got to do everything you can to make sure corrupt powers don't take it from you. But since then, and I wanted to really draw this out, is that I marked the numbers of the corruption, what's called the Transparency Corruption Index, and I've mapped it for Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and now I'm beginning to do it for Hungary and Slovakia over 25-year periods. And Ukraine keeps going up. It's getting out of the Russian corruption sphere through blood and toil, no less, right? The United States is going down. Slovakia is going down. Hungary has been going down, and Russia is down here. And that is really what they're trying to do, is make sure that we have an increasingly corrupt world where your vote won't count. Autocracy is the only way. And when Robert Fico and Viktor Orban just threatened us with no electricity and no security guarantees if they don't get their oil, Russian oil, then they'll just let us die here.
Wow. So the bottom is the goal.
The bottom
That's
is the goal.
yeah, and that is the default. It's much easier to be corrupt than it is to not be corrupt. And I think I also, I think we're in for some revelations eventually in the corporate world as well. You
Thank
think
you.
you think Enron was a mess, and it
I
was.
was in those hearings, no less. And
Were you really
yeah,
in
and
Texas?
my mom worked for
Texas?
Vincent Elkins, so that wasn't even. She
Yeah,
wasn't at V&E at the time that it
yeah.
went down, but I'm like, oh wait, V&E and Arthur Anderson.
I think
Okay.
I think the corporate when this is all said and done, and we have revelations of corporate greed and corruption that is allowed and facilitated by things like Pam Bondi saying we're really not going to do Foreign Agent Registrations Act anymore. We're really going
Mm,
we're going to let companies do what they need to do to make money. The EPA saying we're no longer really regulating environmental
mhm.
disasters at a corporate level. We're gonna be amazed at the level of damage that's being done by corporations that are running wild right now while they can. Yeah. And again, I can't get off the coming suppression of votes.
Right.
Um, women, of course, who have taken their spouse's name,
Mhm.
and their name doesn't match their birth certificate or even their passport.
Right.
But look, this passport thing, I saw a reporting, and maybe in the notes someone can share, whether this has happened yet. But there's a move to no longer have post offices issue passports for you. So
Mm,
the most convenient place for you to go and get your passport is not going to be available to you anymore. Where
mm.
where, where are you going? You're going to put it in the mail, and you're going to hope that the passport office at State Department issues that in time. Ha! For the midterms or the next election? I don't know.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I want to say that I hope we're going to have to do a lot of these briefings, these back and forths where we catch up with our viewers and our listeners, because I like to get their questions after we're done and kind of process what has been evolving. And some of the things we just talked about tonight were beginning to happen. Like, we had the whistleblower case was in the news, but we didn't know it was Kushner's name, at that time. That's a big deal.
The
So
whistleblower
yeah,
complaint against Tulsi Gabbard at DNI.
right,
Yeah.
right. So, and the fact that it involves Kushner, and we don't know why, we just know his name
No,
was in there.
no, we don't.
But I want to highlight one thing for our viewers, is that I'm thankful that you're able to directly talk to them, as opposed to what people may not recognize when you're signed with a network, a big corporate network that, like, people forget that MSNBC was owned by GE for the longest time. And same thing with pretty much all the rest of them. CBS throttling Stephen Colbert recently. You're not under that here on this platform, and I'm really thankful. But I think our viewers need to recognize that free subscriptions to your advice and your wisdom is great. I'm glad that you do that. But even a $5 paid subscription goes a long way to keeping your voice directly available to everyone. And whereas you might not be able to say that, I'm going to say that on your behalf. Same way I do with
Yeah,
everything.
I mean,
So
so thank you. I've never been a salesman, certainly not a good one. And
yeah,
but yeah, independent journalism is where it's at right now. And I know so many of you are facing decisions about, okay, I'm not paying 200, $300 a month for cable anymore. I'm
right,
not subscribing to 4 newspapers anymore.
right.
And now I've got to make a decision about which Substack, authors I'm going to subscribe to. Right. And I get it. It's hard. It's hard. But think about it in that way that, okay, if you're not doing all that expensive stuff anymore, maybe
Yeah,
do some of it on Substack. And look, on for me so far, everything has been free to unpaid subscribers except when I write a column.
right.
Um, that's just the way it has to be. And I appreciate all the support, Chris. You too.
Well, and I'm thankful that you're able to quickly respond to the information that's in the information sphere because like another of your colleagues that's out there, Glenn Kushner. These are folks that we really appreciated online, and I know we like their expertise, and now they're available. I mean, they're popping up
Super
after
available.
every
Super.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
super available, right?
Yeah. Oh, let's let people in on a secret. Another way to get my
Yeah,
stuff for free, at least for now, is YouTube. And
yeah.
this is near and dear to your heart. It's you can find me at the real Frank Figliuzzi. Um, and you're going to get you'll get most of what I do there as well. And
Amen.
it's fun stuff. Fun stuff.
FrankFigliuzzi.com is the website. Don't forget to get not only the FBI way, but Long Haul, your book on long haul drivers and the sex trafficking that was happening in there. I'm glad that you had the conversation with Nancy in this last week. You had not only Roger Sullenberger, but Julie Brown on. So keep doing it. Keep getting the guests up there. I know the viewers will show up. I watch them come in here in the hundreds and up to a couple thousand to get that information. So I know they love what you're doing and keep it up, man, and stay
Thank
safe
you.
over there.
Hey, thank you for all your help, Chris. And also, if you haven't had a chance to check out the interview with Julie Brown on my Substack, I got to tell you, we joke about conspiracy theories, but after talking with Julie, I've gone from thinking that Epstein did die by suicide to thinking that he didn't. That's a powerful interview. Yeah.
All right, my man.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. And
Thanks,
thank you to
everybody.
everyone for joining us. And we will see you soon. I'll be on tomorrow night with our friend Sean Penner to talk about 4 years of active war launched against Ukraine by the Russians. What did they not achieve? What did they throw away? What are the consequences? And we will be on here often. And I will say, Frank, I'm going to blame you for really liking this platform so much. I finally, after 4 years, got on camera myself, got
Yeah.
over the idea I'll just write and that'll be enough. Sergeant Gunnell is another one. When
Oof.
Sergeant Gunnell popped up and directly just talks from his car, I went, if my brother Aquilino can go talk to the people, I'm just going to get on here directly. And I'm doing it often in blackout with some light banks and a lot of fire in my belly. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The conditions you work under and live under every day are astounding. Not to mention when you send me video of missiles going overhead. Yeah.
yep, we've had
Stay,
drones and we'll keep at it. So thank you
stay
everyone. Good
safe.
night. See
Stay
you
safe.
soon.
Take care.
Слава Україні! Героям слава і пиздець Російської Федерації.